that has started.
Okay. So the goal of today is basically to give you a very simple overview about the InSMART project, which lasted for 3 years and ended in March 2017. This presentation is organized in 2 parts. The first one is about the framework and the concept of framework. The second one is more about the tools. This is not just a division in terms of a presentation or discussion. It's really an important clarification that we want to share with you from the very beginning about the difference between the general goal of the project and the general possibility that you have making use of this framework and the tools that you choose for doing this activity. In particular, the goal of the project, of the InSMART project, was to establish and implement a comprehensive methodology for supporting sustainable planning with a specific focus of energy. And the framework itself is, in fact, a combination of tools, data, expert judgment on preferences, practices, and other procedures, which are not just used for a standard projection of energy and emission at local level, but actually aims to be a better support decision tool for decision makers in the context of energy planning at city level. So I will give you a brief introduction of the framework, this general comprehensive methodology, and then Alessandro will tell you more about 2 specific tools which were used in the context of the InSMART project. The methodology starts with an understanding of the city system. In particular, understanding of the building stock, an understanding of the demand of transport of the citizens, an analysis of the urban spaces and public buildings, as well as of the open spaces and the services, and with the identification of the potential of local renewable energy. All this information are collected and organized and visualized, making use of a GIS platform, which somehow is used as a data repository and at the same time as a data provider. You see this double arrow starting from the work package 1 to the other WP, because in fact the GIS makes available some specific information for the sector-specific analysis. All this information is also used by this core of the framework, which is a city planning platform, aiming at exploring the dynamics of the city, making use of all the data provided and collected by the previous work packages. And this city planning platform is mainly based on 2 techniques. The first one is, in this case, an optimization, which actually aims to explore future rational development of the city, coupled with a multi-criteria decision analysis. All this city planning platform provide a series of quantitative data, which are used then to prepare a midterm implementation action plan as a final outcome of the project. Once the methodology was somehow established, then we applied this methodology in the framework of the project to 4 cities, Nottingham, Évora, Cesena, and Trikala in 4 different countries of EU. I just want to stress one key point here, is that the municipalities and the city council were in fact on board in the project. So actually they participated from the very beginning to the main steps of the project itself. Few more information about the methodology and of the framework. The spatial analysis, in our opinion, is absolutely crucial when we want to plan at city level. So instead of working with a single point in the space, like many standard approach generally does, we decided to organize the geographical representation in terms of zones. And we decided to organize the zones within the municipality, just trying to understand what kind of homogeneous buildings, for example, or homogeneous characteristics are present into the zone. You see here an example of 15 zones where we located the buildings, the residential buildings and the tertiary sector. And we also located and represented the transport sector. So the 2 main sectors of this project and our analysis are basically the building sector and the transport. Everything is related to the bulk production of electricity and heat, so the supply and the centralized production of energy is seen as an external, let's say, input from an external area to the municipality. Making use of some database and also door-to-door surveys, what we did was in fact to start describing in a well-precise manner all the key characteristics of the building stock. You see here some of the information. We were able to describe the dwelling stock by zone and by typology, for example, flat, detached, semi-detached, and terraced. The heating system stock, again by zone and by fuel. The dwelling stock by period of construction, meaning that we were able to identify different characteristics of the shell of the building, which basically drive the consumption of these processes, and something similar for all the pure electrical appliances and devices in the building. You see here this chart showing the penetration of the most important appliances per dwelling. So starting from some data collection, we then calibrated this set of information into a reference here for the framework, and then we simulated some alternative settings options. We used also door-to-door survey to characterize the transport sector. So the idea was to analyze the existing and the future private-public demand of transportation by modes, meaning, for example, motorcycle or private cars or buses or train. And the idea was to try to understand better the behavior of people from zone to zone, since we have this breakdown of the municipality into zones. Just to give you an example, you see this tall blue bar in the very center of this chart. This is an area of destination for many trips of people because it's a place of shops and restaurants and is in the very center of the city. So the idea was to try to track the movements of people from zone to zone into the municipality. And one other very important characteristic of the framework that we tried to design and to use was this idea of integration. This chart shows an example of integration according to our design. Many times, the different energy services and the different sectors are managed in a pretty standalone manner. We don't believe this works well. So what we did was to try to aggregate all the sectors, or at least all the energy services, which actually are demanded by the same agent or by the same player into the municipality in one single problem. This chart shows, for example, that the single agent called household is responsible for everything is related to the technology substitution in terms of heating technologies, in terms of cooling technologies, in terms of private transport demand, as well as for the pure electrical uses. And also this allows us to simulate some budget constraints in order to better keep track of the actual energy efficiency improvement of the city. This general description is just to introduce what is the real goal of this framework. The real goal of this framework was basically to explore the dynamics of the city level, of the energy city system. And we did this exploration making use of a standard scenario analysis, but in this case was an integrated scenario analysis, meaning that we designed a reference projection of the city energy system, and then we calculated some alternative dynamics of such a reference, such a system, just making use of different actions or measures or targets, aiming at representing, in fact, alternative planning hypotheses for decision makers. And the possibility to compare the outcomes, so the quantitative data provided by this alternative planning hypothesis, like, for example, for the CO2, provide a set of information for the decision makers. But what kind of outcomes basically we can generate making use of this framework? You see here some examples. We can produce savings by components. For example, the savings due to the refurbishment of the building in terms of wall or in terms of replacement of windows and glasses. or the savings by building typology in one specific point in the time. So for example, in 2020, the share of savings due to the energy efficiency measures in the flat or in the semi-detached. At the same time, we can keep track of electricity consumption by zone and the dynamic of such a variable, and many other quantitative indicators, like, for example, costs, emissions, consumption profile within the year, in order, for example, to keep track of the load shape of electricity and heat consumption, a set of quantitative data to provide information for the local decision maker. Once we generate all this quantitative information and this quantitative information for all the alternative planning hypotheses that we design, we then involve the stakeholder again in a multi-criteria decision analysis, asking them to identify the criteria and the criteria against which to compare the alternative planning hypothesis and the preference that they have for the criteria. In the end, what we, let's say, obtain by this combination of methodologies is a unique profile which is well ranked into this ranking exercise and actually can be used as a basis for the preparation of the Sustainable Energy Action Plan. Let me just clarify again one point. The stakeholder participation is key in the framework, in the sense the stakeholders are engaged in the design of the alternative planning hypothesis because they know how to and what kind of measures they want to test. They are also engaged in the definition of criteria against which all the alternatives can be compared. And they are also obviously engaged in the selection of the preferences of all of these criteria. So as you can see, the stakeholder participation is really key in this framework. To conclude, two slides. The first one, which actually aims to give you an idea about the key differences between the standard strategic energy action plan approach and the InSMART approach, which was designed in the project, and is in fact the framework that we want to share with you. The first main difference is that we don't believe that any downscaling exercise from the national target to the city target work well. So what we did was to approach the problem in a completely opposite manner. What we did was to work with a bottom-up approach, just take into consideration the real urban-specific needs. And also we couple this analysis with a multi-criteria, meaning that we don't believe that the pure cost-benefit analysis can work or is sufficiently representative of the decision process. The second characteristic is that very often transport is not included into the energy action plan at city level. We believe that transport is absolutely is a key part of this analysis. So transport, as I've shared with you before, is included in this framework. A third element of difference is about the emission. The standard approach suggests to keep track of the direct emission, of course, and then to sum up the indirect emission, which is fine for us. But what we wanted to stress with this framework was the component which is completely direct, so dependent of the decision taken into the border of the system. So we decided to work with the direct emission only, and then of course any indirect emission and contribution can be added on top in the end of the analysis. But we wanted to understand exactly the room for improvement in terms of emission reduction of everything is direct. About the emission type, well, the standard approach, since it's a downscaling exercise, generally takes into consideration the GHG emissions, while at urban level, we did keep track of the CO2, but we wanted also to consider the particulate, which is absolutely important in the planning exercise at local level. Then take into consideration the measures and the way all the actions or measures are generally managed in this planning exercises. Well, the standard approach is to consider some cost-benefit analysis, and in particular to look at these actions or measures in a standalone manner. Our approach is again pretty different because the idea was to integrate these measures into one single and comprehensive alternative planning hypothesis. Let me just clarify this point. even if you just count, for example, the net present value of one individual measure and the net present value is positive, then you have to wonder whether the same, let's say, result can be obtained, whether the same measure is included in a more comprehensive vision of the city. So sometimes there are some synergies across measures, sometimes there are some overlaps. So the idea is to approach these measures in a more integrated manner. And this is what we try to do. And the final comment is about the standard approach and the InSMART approach about the urban energy planning. Well, the standard approach generally doesn't consider the urban planning into the energy planning. So to better say, those kind of planning exercises are carried out separately. In our approach, urban planning and energy planning are carried out together. And this is also possible due to the representation by zone that we used in this framework. So these are the, let's say, key principles of the framework that I wanted to share. And this is my final key message for you. So the framework is a general integrated planning approach that can be applied to a variety of case studies. So no matter what is the size of the municipality in principle, and can use different other tools, not only the tools that Alessandro is going to present now, as long as the principle of the method are maintained, meaning that all these key characteristics here listed in this table must be somehow maintained in order to keep the framework self-consistent. Now, I just invite Alessandro to continue the presentation. I just want to share with you these links to the project book of the InSMART project and the information about the website. You can download a lot of materials if you want to know more information about the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Rocco. The idea of the next slides will be, as already Rocco anticipated, are to focus a little bit more on the tools that have been used. So the specific tools that have been used for for creating this city planning platform in the InSMART application. Above all, anyway, I would like to stress an important point that probably Rocco already mentioned somehow. So the starting point when you would like to design a specific case study, a specific decision support platform, I think is always important to start from the key ingredients that you expect from this type of instrument, this type of tool. So just to make you an example, let's start with the key ingredients that are the starting point and the starting requirement for the InSMART application. So, for example, for this type of application, according to our views, was important, first of all, to being able to represent the technologies and the dynamics behind all the technologies. But at the same time, was as well important to keep track of the economics behind this type of transition. So keeping the realism of the micro and the micro and the microeconomics. And at the same time, try to take into account, for example, the role of consumer behavior and choices, and as well, all this type of instruments related to policy, to financial, and so basically all the key elements that basically are important into a transition within a urban system. The last two keywords of this ideal list are, I think, fundamental for this approach, that are basically the integrated approach and the participatory approach. So this was two key elements for this type of project. So basically, according to this wish list, we can say, the city planning platform for the InSMART project was mainly based on two types of tool. The first one, that is the core one for sure, is the energy system model, which is able to provide pathways for transition of the urban system, and will be supported by a multiple criteria decision analysis tool. So basically, the first tool as we said, is a technology explicit model which can be used for explore the evolution of energy and environmental variable in the urban area. This tool has been developed in this case with the Times Modeling Framework, which is a framework which can be used to develop application to any case study and any size of cities and areas. And the key characteristics of this type of framework is, first of all, that approaches the planning into an integrated way. So basically, it uses an integrated approach to model the entire energy system. And it combines both the technical, so the engineering part, and the economic approaches to the system. Just to provide you a kind of very rough idea of how basically an energy system model represent the urban area. Basically, the system is represented by a kind of network of technologies and energy flows that are linked all together. And the approach is to analyze, to assess your system in a comprehensive way. In this way, basically, you can keep track in an integrated way of all the interdependencies of the different commodity flows, the technologies, and as well all the possible competitions between, for example, different sectors. So, for example, the impact of certain action that could be in a specific sector as well to other sector, or for competing technologies. So, for example, technologies which are currently existing with other possible technology options. Supported to this type of tool, we decided to apply a multiple criteria decision analysis. The reasons that underpin this decision is basically that a decision maker basically would like always to try to define and to select the best strategy for the city. However, this type of decision are always driven by individual preferences. So basically, an absolute best alternative is not existing usually. And this is why a kind of MCDA tool can help you on try to identify which is the best compromise decisions among all the possible options. And another key point that enables as well, I think is an added value for including as well this type of analysis in such type of planning exercise, is that involves the participation of the stakeholders, in particular in this case, in the identification of the criteria to evaluate alternative planning hypotheses, and as well to evaluate these criteria based on the perceptions and the priorities of stakeholders. So basically, this is translated into a tool which basically express this decision problem into a decision problem matrix in which all the alternative planning decisions are assessed according to a certain set of criteria. Criteria which can be both quantitative or qualitative. What does it mean? Basically, a quantitative criteria is something that could be measured. It's something that could be with a certain value, could be evaluated. And usually the city energy system model is able to provide this type of measures. So just to make an example, for example, the implementation costs of certain set of measures is something that could be measured, it could have a value. So between different scenarios, we will have different implementation costs, or for example, the expected emission reductions across the different scenarios. As well, is it possible to include some qualitative criteria? So something that could not be defined with a single value, but with a kind of a more generic, more non-numeric values. In this case, for example, you can include some criteria as, for example, which is the impact on job creation in the local areas and elements like that. Another key important that involves the stakeholders then is to specify among these criteria, which is the weight, so based on the local priorities, which is the weights between those criteria. So the final outputs of this type of tool, I think, is very powerful, because among a set of possible alternative planning hypotheses, this type of tool is able to provide you a ranking of these hypotheses, and basically it can drive you to the definition and the short list of the set of planning hypotheses that could be the starting point, the basis for any planning and decision support, any planning document for the urban area. So thus concluding, I just showed you very briefly few of the key elements of the tool that have been applied to this specific project. And if you also follow, for example, the previous webinar, I think you notice that that are available a large number of possible approaches and tools for energy planning. However, I think it's important to stress, to underline that beforehand, before defining which tool to be used, is always this decision should be always driven by the type of planning and policy questions that you are aiming to answer to. This should be always the starting point for any planning exercise. So this small presentation was basically to try to provide you some introduction about the framework and the tool used for in our project. However, if you are still interested in know some more details and at least to see some details about, for example, the real application in the real world of this modeling framework, I suggest you to join us in our next webinar that will be on October 25th, in which we are going to explore the application for 3 of the 4 case studies of our projects. So myself, Rocco, and Luis Diaz from University of Lisbon, we are going through more in details about these 3 case studies. So this was the end of our presentation. I would like to thank you, everybody that joined our webinar. And if there are any questions, we are happy to start some discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocco. Thank you very much, Alessandro. It was a really good presentation. And well, as you all mentioned, please, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat that it's in the right panel, and Rocco and Alessandro will address them while we keep on running.
Yeah, we already have one first question, which is about the complexity or whether it was difficult to involve municipality in our work and how we actually approach the municipality. Well, this project is a FP7U. Was an FP7U project. So the idea was basically to prepare a description of work at the very beginning, so before submitting the proposal. So first of all, we approached the municipality at that time, because the idea was to have the municipality on board as partner of the project. So this is the first point that actually is very important for us. It was not that difficult. The idea was to try to select some of the municipality based on some characteristics. The idea of this project was to work with some medium-sized municipality, not super big municipality, but just in order to make sure that the involvement of the stakeholder was a bit easier. This is the only reason for that. As I said, the framework is very general and can be applied no matter what is the size of the municipality. Each municipality was then, let's say, helped and supported in the project by at least one technical partner of the same country. So we were the technical partner of Cesena, the city of Cesena in Italy. And based on our experience, I would say that it was absolutely not difficult to engage them. They were very committed, very interested in the project. They participated with enthusiasm, I would say. And they were absolutely important because in all the preparation of the tool, we tried to communicate with them and to keep track of their preferences and their needs for the design of the model. Let me just clarify one more time this issue. The framework is general and was used for all the 4 municipalities of the project, and also the type of tools, so the analytical paradigm of the tool was the same. But the model itself, meaning the actual utilization of the tool in the specific case study, was designed according to the specific needs of the municipality. So, for example, you will see during the next webinar that the model for Cesena is a bit different from the model of Évora, even if the framework is absolutely the same and the analytical paradigm is also absolutely the same. So we try to approach the problem really from the point of view of the municipality side. The question is whether we had problems and difficulties in data collection, and if so, what is the ratio of assumption you've adopted in the calculation? Okay, let me just tell you something which is more about the experience of Cesena, since we were more involved in this specific application. We also work with Nottingham, but I would like to make this an example for Cesena. Well, the data collection was not that a big deal. We used the survey, and we got quite a lot of information from the survey. And they also already had a GIS platform which was owned by the municipality, which actually provided quite a lot of information, and then we used this information for the tools that we developed during the project. For everything was not strictly, let's say, owned in terms of data by the municipality. As energy system analysts, we have quite a lot of databases to use, which are maybe more national-wide, but still can be significant, because the techno-economic characteristics of the appliances or devices or technologies in the demand side, or let's say even about cars, can be easily taken by any national database. So what we did, in fact, was to use as much as we could the local specific information, and we coupled we complemented this set of data with national specific information.
However, if you just let me add that point on that, if there's any interest about as well how this type of questionnaires have been designed, in the project website is possible to download directly the questionnaires which have been performed among the 4 cities. About other questions, there's a question about the participatory approach by citizens. Basically, the idea of this project was to develop the whole planning framework among all the steps with a direct contact, first of all, with the first key stakeholder, which is the municipality. So first of all, the participation has been from the municipality point of view, with all the technicians of the different departments that work together in order to provide data exchange, information exchange, and experience in the development of these tools. In the second step, for all the steps about, for example, the scenario definition, so which type of planning hypothesis we would like to try to test, and as well, which type of criteria we would like to use to evaluate the performance of this planning hypothesis, and as well the weights as involved the participation of a stakeholder group, which has basically have been defined between basically all the political stakeholders, so basically the council, the city council of the city, and few technical stakeholders, so the local university, environmental associations, and
agency in general,
and yeah, different agencies which have been identified as key stakeholder for this type of topics.
The next question is about the trade-off. So is there any significant trade-off between energy and urban development objectives in the planning process of municipality? And if so, how they were addressed? This is a very, very important point, because what we tried to highlight was that, in fact, we tried to carry it out at the same time, urban planning and energy planning. You will find extra information about this answer in the next webinar, but just let me try to give a short answer to this point. When I mentioned this idea to prepare planning hypothesis, what I meant was not to test individual measures, but to combine a set of measures, including measures of different sectors in one vision of the city, one vision of the municipality. So what we asked to the city council and to the key stakeholder of the municipality, together with the support of, and our technical assistance, was to design alternative planning hypotheses, combining measures in different sectors, exactly for this reason, for first of all, to boost this communication across different sectors within the municipality. So the transport department and the building department, for example. At the same time, to explore possible synergies or possible overlappings of these, let's say, measures. One example is about the construction of a new cycle line, or the construction of a new road infrastructure, or even the construction of a new shopping mall. All these specific actions are mainly urban-related planning measures or urban-related planning projects, are not exactly and first of all energy-related issues. But of course, there are a lot of impacts of such decisions. For example, the local distribution of the consumption is different if we have a new, let's say, supply center or demand center, like a shopping mall, in a different zone of the municipality. And we have to configure the energy system in such a way that, and also the transport system in such a way that this decision, which is a urban planning decision, can work properly. So what we did was exactly to test and to help them, to support them in thinking as a system, trying to test, making use of a unique decision platform, any kind of action in different sectors across the municipality in one unique problem.
Yeah, just adding on this comment, basically we noticed that basically the downscaling approach that generally is used is not adapting so well to the urban planning, because generally when you talk directly with the urban planner, they usually don't face the issue that comes out from the downscaling of certain, for example, emission targets, renewable targets, and so on. So I think the approach of starting from their real project, their real plan, and then to assess, which is as well the impact in terms of the energy system, of the transport system, has been a key significance for them and for the project, I would say.
Yeah, just to validate what Alessandro just said, and to let's say confirm what he said, when we asked the municipality about the key criteria based on which they would like to they wanted to design their action plan, they said, okay, CO2 and GHG of course are very important, because are important at national level, at global level first, at national level, and then at local level. But for us, there are other priorities. for example, the congestion issue, for example, the particulate, for example, the reduction of consumption in the winter season, of energy consumption in the winter season. So we started from their specific needs in order to design a comprehensive alternative planning hypothesis. And then we measure the performance of this planning hypothesis with respect to the CO2 emission, for example, which of course must be there and must be an indicator to track. But the idea was starting from the bottom to the top. The question is whether the modeling results, for example, the choice of best development option change significantly if one would include indirect emission, electricity production related GHG emission based on coal plants in Greece. How difficult is to include the indirect emission in your model? Well, based on the current design of the models and based on the general approach of the framework, we don't want, or better, we would like not to embed this extra component of emission into the model. What we suggest to do is to add on top after we use the framework and after we solve the model. Why? Because if we make a change in terms of bulk generation of electricity, for example, from switching from coal to gas, of course, the population in general will benefit about this decision, but actually it's not strictly related to the planning at local level because the decision is not local at all. So the idea for us was to stress all the levels of control within the municipality and then to, let's say, use a kind of sensitivity analysis to add on top possible different scenarios for all the variables which are not directly controlled within the local level. So in this particular case, the switch of fuels in the generation of electricity, what we did for Cesena, for example, yes, was to add on top at the very end of our analysis, just in the preparation of the strategic energy action plan, the indirect emission of a possible development of the CO2 per kilowatt hour indicator in Italy. So we can do it, we did it, ex post in the preparation of the strategic energy action plan, not embedded into the model.
About the other question, basically is more related to how the 4 municipalities were selected. Basically, the idea, probably Rocco mentioned it, was first of all to focus on a kind of mid-sized city, even actually is not a requirement for the framework, but generally because was easier for the first application, maybe to try to find a city in which there were relevant issues in terms of planning. So the size should be enough to require a kind of planning exercise, but at the same time, the complexity should be maintained into a kind of a manageable level for first instance. As well, the stakeholder could be maybe involved more easily compared, for example, to a very big city. At the same time, if you compare, for example, the 4 cities across Europe, they do have very different characteristics. First of all, in terms of climate, as well in terms as well of wealthiness, we can say, but as well in terms of population. For example, we do have Nottingham that is almost 500,000 of inhabitants, and we do have, for example, Évora that is about 30,000 people living in the town. So the different scale is very different, and as well a key element for our decision was as well, of course, their involvement in this type of project, and this as well the presence of other studies, other data collection that could help to support this type of planning as analysis.
So we went through some literature just in order to check whether, for example, some municipality in Italy is of this size that we identified as good for this project. What was the quality of their submission in terms of strategic energy action plan before, and whether, for example, they did have an in-house GIS platform already developed, So we just select Cesena because they were very responsive in terms of reaction when we asked them to join, and also because they already have some real commitments in this with respect to this subject. So it's a kind of combination of factors, but as Alessandro said, the idea is that the framework is very general, so there are no restriction in terms of framework. It's more a matter of identifying a good case study for the project that you are running. The other point is whether this approach, if your approach is to be replicated in Eastern Europe, what would be average effort level of participating municipality and an expert team in terms of work days and work months? Well, it's a bit hard to answer right now about this question. Let me just tell you that the InSMART project, so the design of the framework, not only the application, the design of the framework plus the application lasted for 3 years, and the involvement of the municipality was, if I remember well, something like 10 or between 10 and 15 person months per each municipality over the 3 years of the project. But I can tell you something more later on about this point. This is just to say that the idea is to engage them from the very beginning, as we said, so in the design itself of the tool, if a new tool must be designed, and in the operation of the tool at the same time, because all these multi-criteria assessments demand the participation of the stakeholder. So it really depends on the scope. It really depends on the complexity of the municipality. It depends on a lot of variables. But just to share the experience of InSMART project, 3 years of project, more or less 10, 11 partners, and one technical partner which actually used to work next to the municipality in deep contact with the municipality, and the municipality itself was on board with at least 10, 12 per person months over the 3 years.
Well, I don't know if we have any more question. Perhaps we could wait a few more seconds.
Okay. The question is about the results in terms of reduction of CO2 and particulate matter emissions for the preferred scenarios. Well, this really depends on the specific case study. We had 4 series into the project. I invite you to join the next webinar, which actually will show the results. What I can tell you is that, for example, for Cesena, but it's just a general, let's say, description of the results. I would like to Alessandro to speak about Cesena in the coming webinar, is that the reduction of CO2 are significant in the preferred scenario, even if, and this is very interesting in our opinion, the weight of the criterion CO2 reduction was less important than the weight assigned to the criterion particulate reduction. So this is a kind of message that came out from the communication with the local stakeholders. We are very interested in reducing CO2, but first of all, we are interested in reducing some very local and specific issues. And any action, any measure, which first of all reduce the particular and as a secondary effect, let's say like this, reduce the CO2 is absolutely fine. But some measures which actually look at the CO2 issue in particular without spending, let's say, without improving that much the issue in terms of local pollutants is not that, let's say, well ranked according to our analysis. So let me be generic at this stage, and I really invite you to join us for the next webinar.
And yeah, anyway, yeah, very qualitative. I would say that the issue of reducing emission is, of course, is a key for this planning decision. But when you involve stakeholders, there are few criteria which becomes very important at local level. One of them, for example, is local pollutants. that anyway have some health issues, so is a real problem. In other terms as well, could be, for example, other criteria that were ranked very, very well. So they were considered very important for the citizens are, for example, which is the economical impact at local level. So basically, if a kind of planning hypothesis, it will bring some more skilled jobs to your community or will not. This has, according to the local stakeholder, a very important element for deciding a kind of action plan.
Yeah, and the key message that we want to share with you, I mean, based on our experience, is that the only way to engage them in some commitment for reducing CO2 is to approach the local stakeholder starting from their actual needs, and then trying to design together a planning hypothesis which is consistent across a set of criteria, their priorities, and at the same time, of course, the CO2 reduction. But if the idea is that if we just talk with the local stakeholder about global issues, the risk is to lose their attention and their interest in this kind of activity. So that's why we prefer to approach from the very bottom and to engage them from the very beginning in the identification of the actions, of the measures, of the criteria. This is pretty effective for us, in our opinion, based on our experience.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Alessandro. Thank you very much, Rocco. I think that we have also reached pretty much the end of the session. It was a really good presentation, and as you will mention for all of the attendants, next week the InSMART related webinars will go on with the presentation of Luis Diaz on data collection methods of cities' energy systems and networks, which it's an insight from the InSMART project. And in 2 weeks from now, Alessandro, Rocco, and Luis will present the specific cases of Cesena, Nottingham, and Évora for the InSMART project. So it should be a very good opportunity to know with better detail and in a more practical way how the InSMART project work. Once again, Alessandro, Rocco, thank you very much for the webinar. And for everyone, this was recorded, and for tomorrow, the recording and the presentation will be available at our website. Thanks, Alessandro. Thank you, Rocco.
Thank you all
very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.